Judge laughs at Eminem in court. Then he drops a verse that silences the room now. Fluorescent lights in courtroom 7B hummed overhead as Marshall Mathers adjusted his black suit jacket. The unfamiliar weight of formal wear making him feel like he was wearing a costume. 20 years in the music industry, and he'd never felt more out of place than sitting at this defendant's table, facing a judge who clearly had already made up his mind. Your Honor, Marshall's lawyer began, my client has established the Marshall Mathers Foundation specifically to Judge Harrison, waved dismissively, his gray mustache twitching with barely concealed amusement. Counselor, please, we all know what Mr. Mathers is famous for. He turned his attention to Marshall, eyes twinkling with condescension. Rap music, isn't it? All that noise about violence and profanity. A ripple of chuckles spread through the courtroom gallery. Marshall's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. This custody hearing would determine whether he could expand his mentorship program for at-risk youth kids, just like he used to be. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, flipping through papers with theatrical flair, the plaintiff argues that someone with Mr. Mathers' background and artistic choices hardly provides a suitable role model for impressionable children. The opposing lawyer, representing the state bureaucracy trying to shut down his program, smiled smugly. Your Honor, we have documented evidence of Mr. Mathers' explicit lyrics, his history of controversial statements, and frankly, his complete lack of formal education in child psychology or social work. Marshall felt the familiar fire building in his chest, the same heat that had fueled him through trailer park nights and studio battles. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about kids like Marcus, who'd been sleeping in his car before the program gave him a safe place to stay. Kids like Aria, who'd found her voice through poetry workshops after years of abuse. Kids like he had been angry, forgotten, written off by everyone. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. Mr. Mathers, do you have anything to say for yourself? Can you explain why someone who makes a living from what was that charming phrase? Spitting rhymes about crime should be trusted with vulnerable children. The courtroom fell silent. Marshall's lawyer placed a warning hand on his arm, but Marshall was already standing, his blue eyes steady on the judge. Your Honor, Marshall began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You want to know who I am. You want to know why these kids matter to me. Without waiting for permission, Marshall stepped forward, and something shifted in his posture, the awkward formality melting away, replaced by the raw authenticity that had carried him from Detroit's streets to global recognition. I was 8 years old, sleeping on floors, family moving every month, couldn't take any more. Mom working 3 jobs just to keep us alive, while kids at school laughed, said I'd never survive. Teachers saw my anger, called me a lost cause. Social workers shaking heads, pointing out my flaws. But inside, that angry kid was a dreamer with words, someone who believed even when hope felt absurd. The courtroom was dead silent now. Judge Harrison's smirk had vanished. You see these files, these reports on my past. But let me tell you about the kids whose lives contrast. Marcus was 16, living out of his car, told the world didn't want him, wouldn't get far. Now he's in college, studying social work, says, our program saved him from going berserk. Aria found her voice after years of pain, teaching other girls they can break their chains. Marshall's voice grew stronger, more passionate, as he continued. You think my music defines who I am today? Then you missed the message I've been trying to convey. Every angry lyric came from a broken place. Every controversial line showed pain on my face. But healing isn't silent. And growth isn't clean. Sometimes you gotta scream about the hell you've seen. These kids don't need perfect. They need someone real, someone who's been broken and learned how to heal. Tears were streaming down faces in the gallery now. The opposing lawyer sat frozen, his smugness completely evaporated. I've donated millions, but that's not the point. What matters is showing up when the world's disjointed. These kids see my scars and know they're not alone. That broken can be beautiful. Pain can be grown, so judge me on albums from 20 years past, or see what I'm building, something that will last. A place where the forgotten find family and hope, where struggle becomes strength, where kids learn to cope. Marshall paused, his eyes never leaving Judge Harrison's face, which had transformed from mockery to something much deeper. I'm not asking you to like my music, Your Honor. I'm asking you to see what matters, that every kid deserves someone who believes in them, even when they can't believe in themselves. Especially then. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then Judge Harrison removed his glasses and wiped them slowly, his hands trembling slightly. Mr. Mathers, he said finally, his voice completely different now, softer, more human. In 30 years on this bench, I've heard a lot of arguments, but I've never, he paused, collecting himself. I've never heard anyone speak with such genuine conviction about children they're not even related to. The judge looked down at his papers, then back up at Marshall. I have to admit, I came into this courtroom with preconceptions. I saw a rap artist and assumed I knew your story. He shook his head. But what I see now is a man who's transformed his pain into purpose. Judge Harrison turned to the opposing counsel. The state's objections are overruled. Not only will Mr. Mather's program continue, but I'm recommending it be expanded and held up as a model for other communities. The courtroom erupted in applause. Marshall felt his knees nearly buckle with relief, but more than that, with vindication. Not for himself, but for every kid who'd been written off. Every dreamer who'd been told they weren't enough. As people filed out, Judge Harrison approached Marshall personally. "Son," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. And more than that, I owe those kids an apology for almost letting my bias stand in their way." Marshall shook the judge's hand firmly. "We all make mistakes, Your Honor. What matters is what we do next." 6 months later, Marshall stood in the renovated community center, watching Marcus graduate from the program's leadership training. Aria was there too, now helping run poetry workshops for newer participants. The walls were covered with artwork, essays, and photos of kids who'd found their way through the program. On his office wall hung a framed newspaper clipping. Local judge credits rapper's testimony for changing his perspective on youth programs. But Marshall rarely looked at it. He was too busy looking forward, at the next kid who needed to know they mattered. The next young person who needed to hear that broken could become beautiful. Sometimes the most powerful verses aren't the ones that make you famous, they're the ones that change lives, one heart at a time.